Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. And today I want to talk about Santana because it was in the summer of '69 that Bryan Adams wrote a song about the calendar date. No, but it was also the time when Santana made their debut as a band. And they've really been going strong ever since, as has its namesake, Carlos Santana. Now, this is one of those examples of one of the most successful fusion bands of all time. Because, and I've said it again and again, musical genres are just as much about who they are marketed to and consumed by as they are about the style of music itself. And Santana was marketed to and broadly, at least at first, consumed by rock and roll audiences. But it was a fusion of psychedelic rock, progressive rock, jazz, Latin jazz, traditional Latin music, all mixed up together. And Carlos will tell you himself that John Coltrane was his greatest inspiration, a jazz saxophonist rather than a guitarist from a different genre. And you can really see that that spirit of adventurism and not holding back and searching for the more spiritual side of instrumental music in particular is really an implicit and integral part of Carlos Santana's approach to guitar, to arrangement, to composition. Now, at Woodstock, you're seeing the picture of them performing there behind me. You could make an argument that the Santana performance really stole the show. Michael Shreve with his great drum solo, Carlos just wailing, the whole thing just perfect. And you really got to see a band with unabashed virtuosity playing something different than the standard psychedelia or folk rock that dominated the sort of Woodstock scene. And they went from strength to strength from the debut in '69. They followed that up with Abraxas, which some people think is their finest album of all, in 1970. And you had that original classic lineup, of course, that featured future journeyman, get it? Greg Rowley on keys and vocals. Again, Michael Shreve on the drums, Jose Ares on percussion, Dave Brown, a great bass player that too many people forget, Michael Caballero, one of the great percussionists of all time. And this lineup continued for several more albums. There was the third album named as such. And then in '72, they did an album which is arguably their finest hour, even though they've had many. And this was, of course, Caravanserai. Wonderful album, which not only featured members of this classic lineup, but also featured an expanded lineup, which included another future journeyman, Neil Schon. And so there would be no journey without Santana, which goes to show you that virtuosic musicians are able to excel in multiple different genres. Now, the band and Carlos himself had success throughout the '70s. Some of their albums at the end of the decade sold a bit less, but they had some really, really great music. Borboleta, pardon me, was a wonderful one from '74, and '75 had another instrumental hit, one of the biggest instrumental hits of the '70s with Europa, Earth's Cry, Heaven's Smile. And by now, some of the lineup had changed, but the essence of what made the band what it was Carlos. Because even though his solo albums have always been distinct from the band albums, the band really fed off the originality and the creativity and the ethos and the philosophies of Carlos Santana. Now, one of their finest albums, which they never really went out of fashion in a way, so you can't really call it a comeback, but it was Inner Secrets from 1978, which showed that the Santana sound could both adapt but retain all of what made it great. Its Latin influence, its jazz influence, its ability to all sort of meld that in with the rock of the day. And what well, psychedelic rock was the rock of the day in the late '60s. By the late '70s, the rock of the day was AOR. And Santana showed that he was absolutely able to integrate that into his sound. Open Invitation, in particular, a really great standout single from that album, And throughout the 80s, he continued to adapt Z-Bop, a really good album from 1981, possibly his finest album of the era, the 80s era. That is, Alan Pasco was on keyboards, who, of course, played just a few years earlier with Tony Williams and Andy Holdsworth on the Believe It album. Alex Lickardwood was on vocals, who obviously did stuff with Brian Auger, did stuff with David Sanchez, another great keyboardist that we need to talk about. And then, of course, Santana ran, they were almost in danger of becoming a legacy band. But then, of course, at the end of the 90s, Carlos phoned up some of the youngest, hippest pop stars and rock stars of the day and came out with Supernatural, which showed that just as he was able to reinvent himself with the AOR rock fusion sound of the 70s, just as he was able to incorporate the modern gated drum sounds and modern synthesizers of the 80s, he was able to survive into the 90s, a decade where very few artists from the 60s, 70s, or 80s were able to survive because there were such seismic changes, not only in how record companies were becoming less generous with their budgets, albeit the most profitable era for music. I wonder if that was a calculated decision. It was also the era where AOR, melodic rock, prog rock really ultimately died a death in the face of grunge. And it was an era where hip hop started to supplant both rock and rock derived genres on the pop charts. So, in other words, the DJ and the MC became the guitarist, drummer, and keyboardist in terms of the general image people would have of what sort of instruments and pool of talent they would have when they were to close their eyes and say, this is what someone on the pop charts looks like and feels like. And these are the instruments they're working with. But Santana survived all of that. And he did it while remaining remarkably consistent to his style. So consistent that, of course, Frank Zappa even mocked it with an instrumental number on his guitar album. But we all know about that one. So check out Santana. Check out his rare stuff, meaning the stuff that wasn't as popular, along with the stuff that most people already know and love, because the rare stuff is frankly every bit as good as the big stuff. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.